The fluorescent lights of Westfield Shopping Center buzzed overhead as Audrey Mitchell hurried through the crowded corridors, her worn leather portfolio clutched tightly against her chest. The familiar scent of soft pretzels and coffee from the food court mixed with the artificial coolness of the air conditioning, creating that distinctly American mall atmosphere she'd grown up with. At 26, she'd spent countless weekends here as a teenager, but today felt different. Today, she was here on business. Her navy blazer, carefully pressed despite being 3 years old, felt slightly too warm in the October heat that still lingered in Phoenix, Arizona. The interview at Morrison & Associates accounting firm was scheduled for 2:30 p.m., and she'd arrived early to grab a quick coffee and review her notes one last time. After 6 months of unemployment following the unexpected closure of her previous company, this opportunity felt like a lifeline. Audrey's practical flats clicked against the polished tile floor as she navigated around clusters of shoppers, families with strollers, teenagers laughing over shared earbuds, and elderly couples window shopping created a steady stream of humanity that she'd learned to weave through with practiced ease. The mall was busier than usual for a Wednesday afternoon, probably due to the unseasonably warm weather that had driven people indoors seeking air conditioning. As she rounded the corner near Macy's, something caught her attention. An elderly man standing near the fountain in the center court, looking around with obvious confusion. He was well-dressed in a pressed khaki pants and a light blue button-down shirt, but his silver hair was slightly disheveled, and his weathered hands shook slightly as he held a small piece of paper. Audrey's first instinct was to keep walking. She had 20 minutes before her interview, just enough time to get her coffee and find a quiet corner to do a final review of the company's recent financial reports she'd researched. But something about the man's posture, the way his shoulders sagged with uncertainty, made her pause. She approached him slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you all right?" The man looked up, and she was struck by his kind brown eyes, though they held a hint of embarrassment. "Oh, hello there," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "I'm afraid I'm a bit turned around. I'm looking for the service master office. It's supposed to be on the second floor, but I can't seem to find the elevator or escalator. This place has changed so much since I was last here." Audrey glanced at the paper in his hands and noticed it was a printed email confirmation for what appeared to be a job interview. The timestamp showed it was scheduled for 3 p.m., just 30 minutes after her own interview. "Oh, you're in luck," she said with a warm smile. "The elevators are just around that corner past the GameStop, but actually, if you don't mind me saying, ServiceMaster moved their offices about 2 months ago. They're now in the professional building across the street, the one with the red brick facade." The man's face fell slightly. "Across the street? Oh my, I don't suppose you know how to get there? I'm afraid I'm not as familiar with this area as I used to be." Audrey checked her watch. Helping him would cut into her preparation time, but she couldn't just leave him stranded. "I can walk you over there if you'd like. It's not far, and I have a few minutes." "That's very kind of you, but I don't want to impose." "You look like you have somewhere important to be," he said, gesturing to her professional attire. "I do have an interview, but not for another 20 minutes. Come on, let's get you where you need to go." As they walked toward the mall's main entrance, the man introduced himself as Walter Hensley. "I'm 68 years old," he explained, "and this is my first job interview in over 40 years. My wife passed last year, and between the medical bills and, well, let's just say I need to get back to work." Audrey felt her heart tighten. She understood financial pressure all too well. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hensley. What kind of position are you interviewing for?" "Customer service representative. I know it's not much, but I worked in customer relations at the phone company for 35 years before I retired. Figure those skills might still be useful somewhere." They exited the mall into the bright Arizona sunshine. The heat hit them immediately, that dry, intense warmth that could take newcomers by surprise even in October. Palm trees lined the sidewalk, and the distant mountains created a dramatic backdrop against the brilliant blue sky. "The building is just across this intersection," Audrey explained, pointing to a 3-story red brick structure. "We'll wait for the walk signal." As they stood at the crosswalk, Walter studied her face. "You're very kind to help a stranger like this. Your parents raised you right." Audrey smiled, thinking of her mother's constant reminders about treating others with respect and compassion. "My mom always said that helping others doesn't cost anything, but can mean everything to someone who needs it." Wise woman. "What kind of interview are you heading to, if you don't mind me asking?" "Accounting firm. Morrison & Associates. I've been out of work for a while, so I'm really hoping this works out." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Accounting. That's good steady work. In my experience, the companies worth working for are the ones that treat their people well, pay fairly, and have leaders who genuinely care about their employees. The walk signal chimed, and they crossed the street together. The professional building's lobby was mercifully cool, with polished marble floors and a modern reception desk. A directory board near the elevators showed Service Master on the 3rd floor. "Here we are," Audrey said, pressing the elevator call button. "3rd floor, suite 305, according to the directory." "I can't thank you enough," Walter said as the elevator doors opened. "You've saved me from being late and probably making a terrible first impression." "You're going to do great, Mr. Hensley. Just be yourself. Anyone can see you're a good person." As the elevator doors began to close, Walter called out, "Good luck with your interview, Audrey. I hope they recognize what a good employee you'd be." Audrey walked back across the street, checking her watch. She had just enough time to grab that coffee and find a quiet spot to center herself before the interview. As she entered the mall again, she reflected on the encounter. There was something about Walter that reminded her of her grandfather, that same gentle dignity and old-fashioned courtesy that seemed increasingly rare. She purchased a small coffee from the Starbucks kiosk and found an empty table near the bookstore. Opening her portfolio, she reviewed her notes about Morrison & Associates. The firm specialized in small to medium-sized business accounting, with a reputation for personal service and attention to detail. They were known for treating their employees well, offering competitive benefits, and maintaining a family-like atmosphere despite having grown to over 50 employees across 3 offices. The position she was interviewing for was staff accountant, with opportunities for advancement. The salary range was exactly what she needed to get back on her feet financially. After months of interviews that led nowhere, she felt cautiously optimistic about this opportunity. As she sipped her coffee, Audrey's mind wandered back to Walter. She hoped his interview would go well. There was something deeply unfair about people his age having to start over professionally, especially after losing a spouse. She made a mental note to say a prayer for him later. At 2:20, she gathered her things and headed toward the Morrison & Associates office, which was located on the mall's 2nd floor, next to a jewelry store and across from the Barnes & Noble. The office entrance was understated but professional, with the company name etched in elegant lettering on a frosted glass door. Taking a deep breath, Audrey pushed open the door and stepped into what she hoped would be the beginning of a new chapter in her career. The reception area of Morrison & Associates was exactly what Audrey had expected. Warm yet professional, with comfortable seating arranged around a coffee table displaying recent issues of Forbes and Accounting Today. The walls featured tasteful artwork depicting desert landscapes, and soft instrumental music played in the background. A young receptionist with short auburn hair looked up from her computer with a genuine smile. "You must be Audrey Mitchell," she said before Audrey could introduce herself. "I'm Sarah. Mr. Morrison is running just a couple minutes behind, but please have a seat. Can I get you some water or coffee?" "Water would be great, thank you." Audrey settled into one of the plush chairs, trying to project confidence while her heart raced slightly. The office had a welcoming atmosphere that immediately put her more at ease than some of the sterile corporate environments she'd interviewed in recently. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the mall's activity below. Shoppers moved between stores, and she caught a glimpse of the fountain where she'd first encountered Walter. She wondered how his interview was going across the street. "Here you go," Sarah said, returning with a glass of ice water. "Mr. Morrison should be ready for you in just a moment. He's finishing up a call with a client in Tucson." "No problem at all," Audrey replied, taking a sip of water and using the extra time to do a final mental review of her qualifications and the questions she wanted to ask. At exactly 2:35, a tall man in his late 40s emerged from an office down the hall. He had graying temples and wore a navy suit without a tie, giving him an approachable yet professional appearance. His handshake was firm and warm when he introduced himself. "Audrey, I'm David Morrison. Thank you for coming in today. I apologize for the slight delay. You know how clients can be." His smile was genuine, and she immediately sensed that this wasn't going to be one of those intimidating interviews where she felt like she was being interrogated. His office was spacious but not ostentatious, with a large desk, 2 comfortable chairs facing each other, and more of those desert landscape paintings. Family photos were prominently displayed, a woman she assumed was his wife, and 2 teenagers in graduation caps. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "I've reviewed your resume, and I'm impressed with your background. Tell me, what brought you to look for a position with us?" Audrey had practiced this answer, but she delivered it naturally. I'm drawn to Morrison and Associates because of your reputation for providing personalized service to your clients and for creating a supportive work environment. After working for a larger firm that prioritized volume over relationships, I'm looking for a place where I can really make a difference and grow professionally. David nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of mindset we value here. We've been able to build our client base because we treat each business like it matters, because it does. Every small business owner who trusts us with their financials is putting their livelihood in our hands. The conversation flowed smoothly from there. David asked about her experience with different accounting software, her approach to client communication, and how she handled tight deadlines. Audrey found herself relaxing as she realized that David was genuinely interested in her answers, rather than just checking boxes on a predetermined list. One thing I'm curious about, David said, leaning forward slightly, is how you handle situations where you need to deliver news that clients don't want to hear. Tax implications, cash flow issues, that sort of thing. Audrey considered her response carefully. I believe honesty is always the best policy, but delivery matters enormously. I try to present problems alongside potential solutions. For example, if a client's quarterly numbers show they're likely to face a tax burden they weren't expecting, I'd rather have that conversation early when we can still implement strategies to minimize the impact. Excellent answer. That's exactly the kind of proactive thinking we need. David made a note on his pad. Now, I'd like to ask you something that might seem unusual. How do you typically treat service workers, wait staff, retail employees, people like that? The question caught Audrey off guard, but she answered honestly. I try to treat everyone with respect and kindness. Those jobs can be really challenging. And I think how we treat people when we don't have to says a lot about our character. David's expression grew thoughtful. That's very important to us here. We believe that character matters just as much as competence. Actually, more than competence in some cases. We can teach technical skills, but we can't teach someone to be a good person. They spent another 20 minutes discussing the specifics of the position, the team she'd be working with, and the company's growth plans. David explained that they were expanding their small business client base and needed someone who could handle multiple accounts while maintaining the personal touch that set them apart from larger firms. The starting salary is $52,000 annually, with a comprehensive benefits package including health, dental, vision, and a 401k with company matching, David said. We also offer 3 weeks of vacation to start, with additional time off after 5 years. The salary was at the top of the range Audrey had hoped for, and the benefits were better than many places she'd looked at. She felt a surge of excitement, but tried to maintain her professional composure. I have to ask, she said, what's the timeline for making a decision? I'm very interested in the position, but I want to be respectful of your process. Well, I'll be honest with you, Audrey. I have 3 more interviews scheduled over the next 2 days, but I'm required by our managing partner to complete the full process before making any offers. However, he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I can tell you that you've made a very strong impression. As the interview concluded, David walked her back to the reception area. Sarah will be in touch by Friday with our decision. Thank you again for your time today. Audrey shook his hand, thanking him for the opportunity and the thoroughness of their conversation. As she stepped back into the mall corridor, she felt cautiously optimistic. The interview had gone better than she dared to hope, and she genuinely liked both David and the company culture he'd described. Checking her phone, she realized it was nearly 3:30. Walter's interview should be finishing up around now. On impulse, she decided to walk back toward the professional building across the street. She wasn't sure why, but she felt invested in how his interview had gone. As she approached the building, she saw Walter emerging from the lobby. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. His shoulders were slumped, and he was walking slower than when she'd helped him earlier. Mr. Hensley, she called out, jogging to catch up with him. How did it go? Walter turned, and she could see disappointment clearly written on his face. Oh, hello again, dear. I'm afraid it didn't go very well. The position was already filled. They just forgot to cancel the interviews. The hiring manager was apologetic, but he shrugged, trying to put on a brave face. That's terrible, Audrey said, genuinely upset on his behalf. That's so unprofessional of them. After you made the trip down here and everything? Well, these things happen. I suppose I'll keep looking. Walter's voice carried a resignation that broke Audrey's heart. They walked together back toward the mall parking lot, where Walter's older model Honda Civic sat in the afternoon sun. As he unlocked his car, he turned to her once more. Thank you again for your help earlier. You're a very kind young woman. I hope your interview went better than mine. It went well, Audrey said. I should know by Friday. And Mr. Hensley, don't give up. The right opportunity will come along. As she watched Walter drive away, Audrey felt a mixture of emotions, hope for her own situation and sadness for his. Little did she know that their paths would cross again much sooner than either of them expected. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Phoenix bearable after months of brutal summer heat. Audrey sat in her small apartment's kitchen, nursing her second cup of coffee and trying not to stare at her phone. David Morrison had said they'd be in touch by Friday, but he hadn't specified a time, and the waiting was making her anxious. Her one-bedroom apartment was modest but tidy, decorated with a few pieces she'd managed to keep when she'd downsized after losing her previous job. The kitchen table where she sat doubled as her home office, currently covered with job search materials and copies of her resume. Through the window, she could see the complex's small pool where a few early morning swimmers were getting their exercise before the day got too warm. At 9:47 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison and Associates, and Audrey's heart immediately began racing. She took a deep breath before answering. Hello, this is Audrey. Hi, Audrey, this is Sarah from Morrison and Associates. Mr. Morrison would like to speak with you. Are you available to talk? Of course, Audrey said, though her voice came out slightly higher than normal. There was a brief pause, then David Morrison's familiar voice came on the line. Audrey, good morning. I hope you have a few minutes to talk. Absolutely. Good morning, Mr. Morrison. Please, call me David. I have some good news for you. We'd like to offer you the staff accountant position. The salary and benefits are as we discussed, with a start date of Monday, October 21st, if that works for you. Audrey felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over her. That's wonderful news. Yes, absolutely, I accept the offer. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Excellent. There is one thing, though. Our managing partner would like to meet with you briefly before you start. Would you be able to come in this afternoon around 2 WOW? It's just a formality, a chance for him to welcome new team members personally. Of course, I'd be happy to meet with him. Perfect. I'll see you at 2 WOW then. And Audrey? Welcome to the Morrison and Associates family. After hanging up, Audrey did a little victory dance around her apartment. 6 months of unemployment, dozens of applications, and countless interviews had finally led to this moment. She immediately called her mother in Oregon to share the good news, then spent the rest of the morning researching the company's managing partner online. Richard Hensley, according to the Morrison and Associates website, was the founding partner who had started the firm 32 years ago. The biography was brief, mentioning his extensive experience in corporate accounting and his commitment to community service. There was a professional headshot that showed a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, but something about the face seemed familiar, though she couldn't place why. At 1:45 p.m., Audrey arrived at the office wearing her best suit, a charcoal gray ensemble she'd splurged on back when her finances were more stable. Sarah greeted her warmly and directed her to a conference room she hadn't seen during her previous visit. Mr. Hensley will be with you in just a moment, Sarah said. Congratulations on joining the team, by the way. David seems really excited to have you on board. Audrey was reviewing her questions about company policies and procedures when the conference room door opened. She looked up and nearly gasped. Standing in the doorway was Walter, the confused, lost elderly man she'd helped at the mall just 3 days earlier. But this Walter looked completely different. Gone was the uncertain posture and disheveled appearance. Instead, he stood tall and confident, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes held a sharp intelligence that seemed to take in everything. Hello, Audrey, he said with a slight smile. I believe we've met before. Audrey stood slowly, her mind racing to process what was happening. Mr. Hensley? But you, at the mall, the interview. Please sit down, Walter said, closing the door behind him and taking the chair across from her. I imagine you're quite confused right now. That's an understatement, Audrey managed. You said you were interviewing for a customer service position. You seemed lost, confused. Walter nodded. I was acting, though not entirely. The confusion about the mall layout was real. It has changed significantly since I was last there. But the rest... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Let me explain why I was there. He leaned back in his chair, and suddenly Audrey could see the successful businessman that the company website had described. About 6 months ago, we decided to expand our team and hire additional staff accountants. David handles most of our hiring, but I like to be involved in the final decisions, especially for positions that will interact directly with our clients. Audrey listened, still trying to process the transformation. The traditional interview process tells us about someone's qualifications and experience, but it doesn't always reveal character. How someone treats others when they think no one important is watching, that tells us who they really are. So you were testing me? In a way, yes. I've been doing this for years in various forms. Sometimes I'm a maintenance worker in the building, sometimes a janitor, sometimes just a confused old man who needs help. You'd be surprised how differently people react. Walter stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mall across the street. Most people would have walked right past me. They were busy, focused on their own concerns. A few stopped to give quick directions, but clearly wanted to move on as fast as possible. But you, he turned back to her. You not only stopped to help, you went out of your way to walk me across the street and make sure I found the right building. Audrey felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, confusion, and a growing understanding of what had transpired. The interview across the street was fake, completely fabricated. I have a friend who owns that building who lets me use it for these exercises. The service master email was something we mocked up, but why go to such elaborate lengths? Walter returned to his seat, and his expression grew more serious. Because in this business, character matters more than anything else. Our clients trust us with their most sensitive financial information. They need to know that our employees are honest, compassionate, and genuinely care about helping others. He pulled out a tablet and showed her a video feed. We have security cameras throughout the mall, and I had someone recording our interaction from a distance. Would you like to see how you came across? Audrey watched herself on the screen, seeing the moment she first noticed Walter, the way she approached him with genuine concern, and her insistence on helping despite having her own interview to attend. Seeing it from an outside perspective was surreal. Your body language, your tone of voice, the fact that you sacrificed your own preparation time to help a stranger, all of that told us exactly what kind of person you are, Walter explained. This seems incredibly elaborate for a hiring process, Audrey said, still processing everything. It is, Walter agreed. But we've found that employees who pass this test tend to be the ones who go above and beyond for our clients, who build lasting relationships, and who contribute to the family atmosphere we've worked so hard to create here. He paused, studying her face. I should mention that we've never had anyone fail the formal interview after passing the character test. David genuinely liked you and your qualifications, but knowing that you're the kind of person who helps others without expecting anything in return, that sealed the deal. Audrey sat back in her chair, feeling overwhelmed. So I got the job because I helped you? You got the job because you're qualified and because you have the character we value. The help you gave me just confirmed what we hoped to find. Walter stood again, extending his hand. Welcome to Morrison & Associates, Audrey. I have a feeling you're going to fit in very well here. As they shook hands, Audrey couldn't help but smile. I have to ask, what would have happened if I hadn't stopped to help you? Walter's expression grew serious. Then we would have thanked you for your time and continued our search for someone who did. The weight of that statement settled over her as she realized how close she'd come to missing this opportunity without ever knowing it. 3 weeks later, Audrey was settling into her new routine at Morrison & Associates with an ease that surprised her. The office culture was everything David and Walter had promised. Collaborative, supportive, and genuinely focused on doing right by their clients. Her desk was near a window overlooking the mall, and she often found herself glancing down at the fountain where she'd first encountered Walter. The work itself was challenging but rewarding. She'd been assigned to a portfolio of 12 small business clients, ranging from a local restaurant chain to a boutique marketing firm. Each client had unique needs and personalities, and she was discovering that the personal attention Morrison & Associates provided really did set them apart from larger firms. On this particular Thursday morning, Audrey was reviewing quarterly reports for Mesa Mike's Auto Repair when David appeared at her desk with a coffee and a slight grin. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Walter wants to see you in his office." Audrey felt a small flutter of anxiety. She'd seen Walter around the office several times since starting, but they'd only exchanged pleasantries. He maintained a more formal demeanor here than he had during their mall encounter, and she sometimes wondered if she should pretend the whole thing had never happened. "Everything okay?" she asked David. "More than okay," he replied cryptically. "Go on up. He's waiting for you." Walter's office was on the floor above the main workspace, accessible by a staircase near the break room. As Audrey climbed the stairs, she could hear voices and laughter coming from his office. When she reached the top, she saw that his door was open and several people were gathered inside. "Audrey!" Walter called out as he spotted her. "Perfect timing. Come in, come in." The office was larger than David's, with a sitting area that included a couch and several chairs. Gathered there were David, Sarah the receptionist, two other accountants she'd been working with, and a man in his 70s she didn't recognize. "Audrey, I'd like you to meet Frank Martinez," Walter said, gesturing to the older gentleman. "Frank owns Martinez Construction, one of our longest-standing clients." Frank stood and shook her hand warmly. "Very nice to meet you, Audrey. Walter's been telling me about your work on the Henderson Restaurant Group account." Audrey was puzzled. Henderson Restaurant Group was one of her newest clients, and while she'd been working hard to get their books organized, she didn't think she'd done anything particularly noteworthy. "I'm not sure I understand," she said. Walter gestured for everyone to sit. "Frank, why don't you tell Audrey what happened yesterday?" Frank settled back into his chair with a smile. "Well, I was having lunch at Henderson's downtown location, the new place on Central Avenue, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two businessmen were discussing their accountants, and one of them was complaining about how his firm never returns calls, charges for every little question, and treats him like just another number." He paused to take a sip of coffee. The other man, turned out to be Jim Henderson, the owner, said he used to have the same problem until he switched to Morrison & Associates. He specifically mentioned his accountant, Audrey, and how she'd not only reorganized their books, but had also identified some tax advantages they'd been missing for years. Audrey felt her cheeks warm. She had discovered that Henderson's was eligible for certain small business tax credits they hadn't been claiming, but she'd just considered that part of doing her job thoroughly. "But here's the best part," Frank continued. "Jim told this other businessman that when he called with a question about payroll taxes last week, Audrey not only answered his question, but also walked him through the implications for the next quarter so he could plan accordingly. He said she treated his small restaurant like it was her only client." Walter leaned forward. "What Frank isn't mentioning is that the other businessman at the table was Tom Bradley, who owns Bradley Manufacturing. Tom called us this morning to schedule a consultation about switching his accounting from Peterson and Webb." "Peterson and Webb?" Audrey recognized the name as one of the largest accounting firms in Phoenix. "But they're huge." "Exactly," David said. "And Tom Bradley's company generates about $3.2 million annually. If he becomes a client, it would be one of our largest accounts." Audrey was stunned. "All because of one conversation Mr. Henderson had at lunch?" "All because you treat every client like they matter," Walter corrected. "Which brings me to why I asked you here." He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a folder. "Tom Bradley's consultation is scheduled for next Tuesday. David and I would normally handle something this significant ourselves, but we'd like you to be part of the presentation team." Audrey's eyes widened. "Me? But I've only been here 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks, you've already generated a referral that could bring in 6 figures of annual revenue," Walter said. "Plus, you understand what small and medium-sized businesses need because you listen to them." David nodded in agreement. "We're not asking you to lead the presentation, but we want Bradley to meet the person whose approach to client service convinced Jim Henderson to recommend us." Frank chuckled. "If it makes you feel any better, Audrey, I was the one who convinced Walter to start this company 32 years ago. I was his first client, and I can tell you that the personal attention you're giving your clients is exactly what built this firm's reputation." Walter sat back down and his expression grew more serious. "There's something else, Audrey. The Bradley account would be complex enough that we'd need to assign a senior accountant to manage it. If the presentation goes well and we land the client, we'd like to promote you to senior staff accountant with a salary increase to $58,000 and additional responsibilities." Audrey felt overwhelmed. A promotion after 3 weeks seemed impossible, but she was learning that Morrison & Associates operated differently than other firms. I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say you'll do your best on Tuesday," Walter said with a smile. "Though, based on what we've seen so far, your best is pretty remarkable." As the meeting broke up and everyone returned to their work, Walter asked Audrey to stay for a moment. "I want you to know," he said once they were alone, "that what happened at the mall was just the beginning. Character got you in the door, but your work speaks for itself. You've exceeded every expectation we had." Audrey looked out the window at the mall below, reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. "Can I ask you something? How many people have you tested over the years?" Walter thought for a moment. "Probably close to 50 for various positions." You'd be surprised how few people stop to help a stranger in need. What's the success rate? I mean, of the people who pass your test? 100%, Walter said without hesitation. We've never had an employee who demonstrated genuine kindness to a stranger turn out to be anything less than exceptional. It's the most reliable hiring predictor we've found. As Audrey returned to her desk, she thought about the chain of events that had led her here. A simple act of kindness, something her mother had taught her was just basic human decency, had changed the trajectory of her career and her life. She opened her computer to work on Tom Bradley's file, which David had already shared with her. As she read through the company's financial history, she felt a familiar excitement about diving into complex problem-solving. But more than that, she felt grateful to be working somewhere that valued the kind of person she was, not just what she could do. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How's the new job going?" Audrey smiled as she typed back. "Better than I ever imagined. Turns out being nice to people is good for business." Looking out at the mall's fountain one more time, Audrey couldn't help but think that sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as simple chances to help others. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing work that mattered, with people who shared her values. As she dove into the Bradley manufacturing file, she made a mental note to call her mother later and tell her the whole story. After all, this success belonged to both of them. Audrey had just been living the lessons she'd learned at home. The afternoon sun streamed through her window as she worked, and for the first time in months, Audrey felt truly optimistic about the future. Sometimes, she reflected, the best career moves are the ones you make without realizing you're making them at all.